So yesterday there was a tweet by Steve Orlando. If you know who he is, he's a comic book writer. And he said, I got some big news, and you're going to get that news tomorrow. I was like, oh, how's he going to under-deliver on this one? And it turned out to be far more laughable and comical than I could have imagined. We know that Steve Orlando had moved into the X-Men office. There's a way that it's been explained to me. When the X-Men cabal, the writers who are actually running the damn thing instead of Jordan White, they want a new member of the team. They get him like a one-shot, which happened with Vita Ayala, which has happened with Steve Orlando. He did like the annual for Marauders, and that gets him in, I guess, to the X-Men like Slack chat or something. And then they are able to get him a full-time gig. So obviously he's the Marauders writer now. And I knew this was going to be something different. And it's going to be a giant-size X-Men Thunderbird coming out in April. Now, there's a lot of laughable details to this, because this one includes a celebrity co-writer. In the minds of Marvel Comics, it's a celebrity co-writer. Marvel really embarrass themselves every time they try to do this. It's so weird how they have no confidence in the star power of their own creatives to actually carry a title. You know, if you have the right writer, the correct writer, with the right character, you know, things should work out. If you put a little bit of marketing publicity, you know, it should find its audience. And they're so scared. Or maybe they just want to be seen as being a part of something. Like, I'm a huge wrestling fan. Technically, this should be like, I'm the audience for this, but I don't want to see wrestlers write comic books in the same way that I don't want to see Chris Claremont in the Royal Rumble. Like, get out of here with that stuff. The two things don't mesh. We've seen them try it in the past. So we are getting giant-size X-Men Thunderbird #1 in April. This will be the return of John Proudstar, a.k.a. Thunderbird, the very first X-Men character ever to die in action. And this will be Marvel's calling it his long-awaited return to the universe. They are saying this is going to be a mega-sized one-shot that will mark the exciting Marvel Comics debut of All Elite Wrestling superstar Nyla Rose, who will team up with comic star Steve Orlando and First Nations artist David Cutler. The only description there that absolutely fits the creator on here is First Nations artist David Cutler. Steve Orlando's not a star, and Nyla Rose is certainly not an All Elite Wrestling superstar. Yes, Nyla Rose wrestles in All Elite Wrestling. I'm an enormous fan of All Elite Wrestling. And I hate to break this. I mean, if you're a wrestling fan, you know this as well as I do. Nobody in All Elite Wrestling, as far as the audience, cares about Nyla Rose. They put the biggest heat magnet, or one of the biggest heat magnets in the entire history of wrestling, Vicky Guerrero, paired that character with Nyla Rose to go out there and get people to boo the character, and no one cares. They boo Vicky sometimes, but Nyla Rose doesn't get a chirp because Nyla Rose isn't a comic book or a wrestling superstar. They're just somebody that's part of the show that no one cares about. Unfortunately, you know, and All Elite Wrestling is very, very young. It's a new upstart wrestling platform. It's been there for a few years now, but it's not like they're coming over from WrestleMania or the WWE. Now, I can see why Marvel Comics would be excited to get a Nyla Rose on a comic book. To my knowledge, this is the only transgender female wrestler at either of the two big companies in North America. You know, WWE doesn't have one. This is the one that's at All Elite Wrestling. So I could assume that they think this is, I don't know, diversifying their creators. But Nyla Rose isn't a writer, to my knowledge. When you look at the press release, they don't mention anything Nyla Rose has ever written, like a book that they wrote before. Maybe they're a contributor to some type of nerd site, or maybe they wrote some indie comics in the past. They just decided to cast Nyla Rose here as some type of superstar creator because they're so embarrassed of themselves. They have no confidence in their own ability to push talent that I don't even know what's going on here. It's laughable. Nobody knows who Nyla Rose is. And it doesn't even matter that nobody knows who Nyla Rose is because they've tried this and failed before. They tried it with CM Punk. CM Punk was an enormous star in professional wrestling when he was with WWE. Of course, he did take the 7-year break where he was even fighting for the UFC, so you got even more mainstream recognition, at least for CM Punk. He's also in All Elite Wrestling now. Nobody bought his Drac comic book or Drax comic book because no one cared. People want to watch CM Punk wrestle, but they don't want him to write comic books. Obviously, they also did it with his wife, AJ Lee. Maybe it's AJ Mendez is his real name. Maybe she wasn't with Marvel. She's written comic books too, and it hasn't worked out either because no one cares about that kind of stuff. Even when you have a high-profile movie producer like J.J. Abrams, they brought him onto that Spider-Man series with his nerdy-looking son. Nobody bought that either. I mean, they bought the first issue because they said there was going to be a new villain introduced, but by the time it ended, no one cared because it was awful. And J.J. Abrams doesn't put asses in seats for comic books. It's embarrassing that Marvel Comics thinks that bringing Nyla Rose in on this comic book is a big deal, or that putting Steve Orlando on anything is a big deal. It's like, and I'm embarrassed as a comic book fan. Now, I understand what they're doing. There has been a lot of success lately bringing kind of more mainstream recognized talents into comic books. Obviously, Keanu Reeves on Berserker. That's Keanu Reeves' literal passion project. He handpicked the talent that's on the comic book. He's been working on that story for a long time on his own. So he's got some skin in the game. You think about Khaleesi from Game of Thrones. I know she's got that Mother of Madness comic book that's really terrible at image. But the awareness of those people to general audience is much larger than Nyla Rose. Like I said, no one, and it's no fault of Nyla Rose. They're not a very good wrestler. Nobody knows who this person is. When they have had success in the past, bringing someone in from like Hollywood or outside, and it's worked, it's almost always been writers. You know, you think about Kevin Smith on Daredevil, Joss Whedon Avengers and stuff like that. It's supposed to be a publicity stunt, but no one's going to care because, like I said, no one's heard of Nyla Rose. And this is, you know, it's embarrassing for Nyla. It's embarrassing for Marvel Comics. Embarrassing for me as a comic book fan that even any of this is even going on. This is what Steve Orlando, the writer, superstar Steve Orlando, had to say. Hey, and if you like Steve Orlando, I've liked a few of his comic books too, but he ain't a star. Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's call a spade a spade. Comic book writer Steve Orlando, this is what he had to say. At last, the news is out. Giant-size X-Men Thunderbird is coming. I couldn't be prouder to be part of it, but this book wouldn't exist without the incredible work of Nyla Rose and David Cutler, who are joining me on this blockbuster to tell a Thunderbird story that's as raw, real, and riveting as possible with the invaluable help we're taking Thunderbird on a two-fisted, phrasing quest to reunite with his family and carve out a place for himself in this brave new Krakoan era. The world has changed while Thunderbird was away. The threats might have gotten more complex, but Thunderbird's still, sure, there's not a problem out there that he can't solve with two hands. Apparently two fists. Who would have figured? Who asked for Thunderbird to return to Krakoa in the Marvel Comics universe? Sure, there are probably some people out there like, oh, I'd love to see Thunderbird. You know, his brother's already there. They literally replaced a character with his brother. Scalp Hunter was just in Hellions. We're never going to see that character again. You know, Forge is out there. If you need a Native American character, there's a couple of really good ones that are completely underused, and no one asked for Thunderbird to return in the first place. Do we not remember Chaos War, the literal worst X-Men comic Chris Claremont ever wrote? Pepperidge Farm remembers. I remember I accidentally bought the whole collection of that thing at a Comic-Con a couple of years ago. It was awful. Listen, here's the thing. The thing. I know Resurrection is here. But don't we have enough mutants in the 616 right now? Are there not enough mutants on Krakoa and on fucking Mars right now that we don't need to resurrect every Tom, Dick, and Harry into the Marvel Comics universe? And Thunderbird, you know, quite frankly, he served his purpose. He was meant as a plot device to show the new dangers and how much more dangerous that the new X-Men series was going to be under Chris Claremont after Giant-Size X-Men introduced Second Genesis. You know, Thunderbird was in there to die and show you that these characters were in jeopardy while they're on missions. He served his purpose. They keep bringing him back every 5 or 10 years, and it never works out. Just leave him alone. There are too many mutants as it is right now. Last thing we got to talk about, and this is This might be more embarrassing than Nyla Rose. Look at this. You see that? Look at, you see that? See that? Look at that character design. Is Thunderbird a hunchback now? Is that what happened? Why does he have posture like that? And who's the color artist on this? My grandma? I haven't seen a color palette like this with pastels up and down the decorating scene since Christmas of '86. Can we get some decent, vibrant colors on the character? Why does he look so drab and lame? Get a better color. Listen, just because you brought David Cutler in to bring the character back and illustrate the comic book, obviously you have no faith in it, or you put a good artist on it. Fucking bring somebody in that can design the character and make them look cool, because this looks awful. I personally think, just reading the whole thing, the entire thing is embarrassing. Marvel makes himself look foolish every time that they try to do this. Oh, look, we're cool. We got mainstream stars, in the Marvel universe writing stuff that you've never heard of. Why are they making a big deal of Nyla Rose? You know who doesn't make a big deal of Nyla Rose? All Elite Wrestling, where she's supposed to be somebody important. Whatever. Marvel Comics can now say they have the first transgender female wrestler in one of the major North American wrestling promotions is writing a comic book now. Does that seem like a big achievement to you? It doesn't to me. Does that make you want to buy and support this comic book? It doesn't to me. You know what would make me want to buy and support this comic book? First of all, if it wasn't Thunderbird, if it was somebody else, like, why is he bringing the character back? But if it has to be Thunderbird, don't let it be Chris Claremont, because I remember Chaos War X-Men. Put somebody cool on this, like a good fucking comic book writer, not named Steve Orlando. Steve Orlando's, you might as well put Tim Seeley on the book. What do you want? You want a 2 in 10 chance that it's going to be readable? How's this? I am unimpressed with Marvel Comics' performance. It's completely laughable. And this was the big news Steve Orlando was talking about. I knew he wasn't going to deliver on the promise of that tweet. Hopefully I delivered on the promise of this video.